Hello, and welcome to Piano Tech Hub. I'm Micah, and today we are answering the most frequently asked question on this channel. What is the best piano tuning lever tip? The tuning lever tip is an incredibly important but often overlooked part of your piano tuning lever's performance. Pairing the best carbon fiber lever with a mediocre tuning tip is like buying the best running shoes but forgetting to tie your laces. Finding a way to objectively compare these tips was quite challenging, but after 3 different attempts over a year of time, I think I finally had something helpful to share. I will be comparing performance of the 6 most commonly used piano tuning lever tips in 2025 according to a few online polls. I'll be rating each one on a 3-point scale and comparing them across brands and then giving an overall average at the end. The first thing I considered was horizontal and vertical movement of the tip on the tuning pin when viewed at from a grand piano's perspective. So horizontal, vertical. Then I looked at depth of fit. Are we too shallow? Is it good? Or are we resting on the coils of the string even? And then does the tuning tip stick when removed from the pen? This can be quite irritating and will even throw off some really fine tuning at high levels. And most importantly, does it translate my force input directly and predictably? Or is it wobbling all over the place in this weird rotational motion and introducing excessive flag pulling? I tested each tip on the same lever with the exception of Jahn and only tested the number 2 size or nearest equivalent from the manufacturer. I found that each tip may fit differently across piano brands and individual tuning pin manufacturers, so here's the method I used. I evaluated multiple major piano brands individually, changing my tuning tip 6 times per tuning like an insane person and taking furious notes to try to get the most accurate comparison possible across many months of tuning time. I focused on instruments that are 40 years old or newer. I found that things generally fit the same across differing models of the same brands, so I took an average of each brand and listed the results, along with my general thoughts on each tip. The first tip I am evaluating today, selected in random order, is the Cassotto Prestige 1A. This tip was developed by Randy Cassotto to emulate the discontinued BKB tip. Specifically, the 1A is to emulate the number 2 BKB. This brand definitely offers the most fit options, but each tip is $155. Let's find out if it's worth the price tag. Starting with Yamaha, I found minor horizontal and major vertical play. It doesn't seat quite as deeply as I would prefer, which likely contributes to the vertical wobble I was feeling. It does not stick on pins when removing, and despite the vertical wobble, it still provides an excellent sense of control and of pin movement, as the vertical play isn't really noticed during normal use. I'm rating this a 2.5 out of 3. Kawai. I found moderate play in both directions, normal depth of fit, and it does not stick at all. I found that applied force felt a little bit wobbly, but not too bad. 2.25 out of 3. New York Steinway. This tip has minor horizontal and vertical play. It provides an excellent sense of the pen and no sense of rotational wobble or poor translation of force from the lever. It does not stick when removed and rests at a normal depth, which I would consider about 1/8 to 3/16 of an inch above the coil. Overall, the fit is nearly perfect except for that moderate vertical wobble, which you feel just a little bit in normal tuning. This is getting a 2.75 out of 3 for Steinway. American Baldwin. I found moderate horizontal play and major vertical play. The tip sits quite shallow, but it does not stick. The pins on these pianos feel oversized, and the overall control felt quite poor. This is a piano I would probably upsize to a number 3 or equivalent tip on, because these are definitely larger pins. 1.75 out of 3. I am really impressed with this tip. It's the most expensive on the market, but it lives up to that price tag and feels great on almost every piano I tuned with normal sized pins. It's not my favorite tip on rebuilt pianos that have 3/0 or bigger pins, but for 90% of my day-to-day tunings, this feels great. The Cassotto Prestige 1A is receiving a 2.5 out of 3 overall. The next tip we are evaluating in a randomly selected order is the Reyburn ProTip number 2. This tip is sold by Reyburn Tools for $135 US and is currently available in sizes 1 2, and 3. It has the most eye-catching design of all the tips that I've used and is made by a very well-respected toolmaker in the industry, but does its performance live up to its aesthetic? Let's find out. I found moderate to major play in both directions with this tip. It sits quite deeply on the pin, but not quite on the coils, and it doesn't stick at all when removed. This tip feels too large for these pins, providing a moderately poor translation of force that's prone to flag pulling and kind of rotating quite a bit when applying force. 1.9 out of 3. Kawaii. Found major wobble again in both horizontal and vertical directions. It sits deeply, touching the coils even on some models of Kawaii, but it does not stick when removed. This tip has significant rotational movement on the pin, which applies force at a weird angle and definitely lends itself to more flag pulling and poor control. You can certainly compensate for it and do nice tunings, but it doesn't feel very good. 1.6 out of 3. Boston. Again, major wobble in both directions, and it sits so deeply it's almost on the coils, but it doesn't stick when removed. This tip has quite poor application of force on these pins, again, providing a shockingly poor fit. 1.5 out of 3. New York Steinway. Found moderate play in both directions, again, sitting so deeply it's nearly on the coils, but it doesn't stick when removed. This tip offers moderately poor translation of force, and generally just has a wobbly rotational feel to it when tuning. It did feel a little bit better than the other brands, but it's still only getting a 2.1 out of 3. Baldwin. Moderate horizontal play and minor to moderate vertical play, sitting at a normal depth this time and not sticking still. It feels fine on these pins, but not great. There is a minor feeling of wobble when applying force. It actually feels the best on the Baldwin pins than any of the other brands I tried, which makes me think the Baldwin pins are large and this tip is a little large, and so it fits better on those pins. 2.4 out of 3 for Baldwin. Overall, I was unfortunately disappointed with this tuning tip, especially since it's made by one of my favorite piano tuning lever makers. The machining and visuals are wonderful. It's clearly very well made, but it feels more like a 2.5 or a 3/0 size rather than a 2/0. Feeling quite sloppy on almost every piano I tried. It felt the best on Baldwin's, which is a piano that generally no other tip felt that nice on. So I am glad to see that the number 1 and number 3 sizes are available now, and I can't help but wonder if the number 1 size would fare better when compared to other number 2 sizes. Overall, the Reyburn ProTip is receiving a 1.9 out of 3. Third on our randomly selected list is the Itoshin 99 number 2 size. This is a tip generally sold for the Japanese market, but it's included with most Falk tuning levers. Falk is one of the most used lever brands out there, so this tip is still widely used in the States, despite not having a clear importer to purchase from. It's generally available around $110 from eBay sellers, but if someone else knows of a more direct source, please let me know. Yamaha. I found moderate play horizontally and major play vertically. Seats at a normal depth and it doesn't stick. Overall, I found a poor translation of force that felt kind of wobbly when using, giving it a 1.75 out of 3. Kawaii. I found minor to moderate play in both directions, sitting at a normal depth and not sticking when removed. I found moderate control with this tip and a slight sense of wobble, but nothing too bad. 2.5 out of 3. Boston. Moderate to major play in both directions, sitting at a normal depth and not sticking when removed. It has a moderately poor translation of force and wobbles around a fair bit when tuning, giving it a 1.9 out of 3. New York Steinway. Minor play in both horizontal and vertical directions. It fits deeply on the pen, but not on the coils. It sticks slightly when removed from the pens, which is a little frustrating, but I did still get excellent control with this tip on these pianos, giving this tip a 2.75 out of 3. Baldwin. Moderate play in both directions, normal depth and no sticking, but still moderately poor control when actually trying to apply force. 2.1 out of 3. Overall, I think the Itoshin 99 is a perfectly fine tuning tip. It's not the best fit that I've found, but definitely not the worst. Occasionally, it sticks when being removed from tuning pins on a couple of brands, but it didn't really happen all that often, and it wasn't bad enough to affect my experience very much with this tip, nor did I feel like it really knocked any of my tunings out. The Itoshin is receiving a 2.2 out of 3 overall. Fourth in our review is the Watanabe No. 2 tuning tip. This is another Japanese-made tip, but it is a lot more readily available in the States than the Itoshin is. It has the, by far, lowest price tag of all of the tips that I reviewed, coming in at $23 from Shaft for the 1-inch No. 2 tip, and is included on all Watanabe and Levitan levers. This is available in a number of sizes, lengths, and wall thicknesses. Yamaha. Moderate horizontal wobble and major vertical wobble on Yamaha tuning pins. It sits slightly shallow on the pins, but it does not stick when removed. Overall, it felt pretty wobbly on these pianos, and control was moderately poor, giving this a 1.9 out of 2. Kawai. Minor horizontal play and moderate vertical play. It sits slightly deep on the pins, but it's not touching the coils, and it does not stick when removed. Overall control felt pretty decent, but slightly sloppy, giving this a 2.5 out of 3. Boston. Moderate to major play in both directions, sitting at a normal depth and not sticking when removed. Moderate translation of force issues, yielding a moderately sloppy feel and kind of some rotational play when applying force, giving it a 2 out of 3. New York Steinway. Moderate play again in both directions. It fits deeply on the pins, not touching the coils, and it does not stick. I had a decent sense of control and stability on the pin, but it felt slightly wiggly, giving it a 2.4 out of 3. Baldwin. Moderate horizontal play, but extremely bad vertical play. Like, this is the worst of any tip on any piano that I've tried. Slightly shallow depth, but it's not sticking when removed from the piano, which sometimes accompanies a shallow depth. Incredibly bad control of the pen, and there is a ton of slop and a strong sense of rotational movement when applying force. Just a disgusting feeling tip on this piano, giving it a 1.4 out of 3 for Baldwin. The Watanabe tip overall is fine, despite that Baldwin review. It doesn't feel great on most pianos, but only feels terrible on a few. For the price tag, it's perfectly acceptable at $23, hard to complain, but I would definitely consider it a starting tip and not something I'd want to tune hundreds or thousands of pianos with. The Watanabe is receiving a 2 out of 3 overall. Next on our list to review is the Tafijin No. 2. This is a tip made by Tafijin Piano Supply out of Belgium. It is available in the States from Pro PTN and Reyburn tools for $45 US. Until mid-2024, this was the tip included on all of Reyburn's tuning levers prior to the release of the Reyburn ProTip. So there's a lot of these out there. Yamaha. I found moderate play in both directions, seating quite deeply on the pin but not quite on the coils, and not sticking when removed. It provided moderate control of the pins but felt slightly sloppy when applying force and rotated around a bit. 2.25 out of 3. Kawai. I found major slop in both directions, just wiggling all over the place. It sits really deeply on the pins, but not quite on the coils, but it doesn't stick when removed. It provides a very poor control of the pin and just felt really messy. This is definitely the worst tip on Kawai pianos, receiving a 1.5 out of 3. Boston. Moderate play in both directions, a deep fit that doesn't stick when removed. It felt slightly sloppy when applying force, but overall pretty reasonable, receiving a 2.25 out of 3. New York Steinway. On New York Steinway, I found an extremely sloppy fit in both horizontal and vertical directions. Seating so deeply on the pins, it's resting on the coils before the tip is actually fully seated, but at least it doesn't stick when removed. Overall, the Tafijin was an incredibly poor fit for New York Steinway, causing some pretty major control problems, giving it a 1.2 out of 3. I think this might be our lowest. Baldwin. Extreme play in a horizontal direction and major play in a vertical direction. Seating slightly shallow, doesn't stick when removed, but is extremely sloppy when applying force and provides a very poor sense of control, receiving a 1.4 out of 3. The Tafijin tuning tip is just not a good tuning tip. It feels very sloppy on most pianos and provides a poor sense of pen movement and control. My favorite part of this tip is the cute little mouse that I've talked about before, but unfortunately I will not be using these tips again. The Tafijin is receiving a 1.7 out of 3 overall. And last but not least, the Jahn number 2 tip. This tip is the only one on the market that uses male threads. It cannot be used on a number of very common tuning levers unless you're able to track down a thread adapter, which I still have not been able to, so if you know where to get one, please let me know. It is available from Fuyang, Supply 88, and Schaff for between $50 and $60 US depending. It is available in several sizes and lengths, most commonly the 40mm or the 30mm. For my review, I used the 40. I had to test this tip using a Fuyang lever instead of the Reyburn or Cassotto I used for all of the other tips. Let's see how it did. Yamahas. I found moderate to major play horizontally and major play vertically, seating at a normal depth, but it does occasionally stick when being removed. It yielded a moderately poor translation of force and sense of control on these pianos, giving it a 1.4 out of 3. Kawai. Found moderate play in both directions on Kawais, sitting at a normal depth, but still occasionally sticking when removed. Decent control, but slightly sloppy feeling, and that sticking is kind of annoying, giving it a 2 out of 3. Boston. For Boston, I found moderate horizontal play and major vertical. Seats quite deeply on the pen, and it still sticks sometimes when removed. This tip gave me moderately poor control on these pianos, giving it a 1.6 out of 3. New York Steinway. Found minor movement horizontally and moderate vertically. A slightly deep fit, but thankfully it doesn't stick on these pens. I had good control and application of force on these pianos, giving me a much better fit on Steinways with this tip. The Jahn is getting a 2.75 out of 3. Baldwin. I found major horizontal play and moderate vertical on Baldwins. A shallow fit, but it doesn't stick when removed, giving me moderate control, feeling slightly wobbly when applying force. 2 out of 3. I know the Jahn tip is quite popular, largely due to being included with the Fuyang lever, which is by far the most common lever used in the States. But I think it is a mediocre tip that is primarily used because adapting to a different tip, if you have a Fuyang or similar lever, is just a pain. It's a serviceable tip, but its tendency to stick a bit is quite annoying, and it's definitely not the best tip available. The Jahn is receiving a 2 out of 3 overall. Thank you for making it this far into the review if you're still here. This video was not sponsored by any of these makers, and I have tried my best to be completely objective in my evaluation. One thing this study revealed to me is that every piano fits just slightly differently, or a lot differently, and what you service most frequently may impact the kind of tip that you're looking for. Overall, there is a clear winner across most of these piano brands that I tested, but I was still able to get nice tunings on every piano with each of these tips. Your experience may differ, so I welcome any disagreements and look forward to doing battle in the comments. The final results for the brand. I'm not going to go through each one of these verbally again because I've already talked way too much, but here are the written results for all of the brands. Please screen cap this for future reference if you'd like, and I will also leave a timestamp in the description if that's helpful for you. And finally, I added all of the brand scoring together and took an average to give us our final results. Coming in first place with a very strong 2.5 out of 3 is the Cassotto Prestige 1A. This is a fantastic tip that feels great on just about every piano I used. The only time I wouldn't really want to use it is if I'm working with oversized pens. It is just a fantastic tip, and I plan on getting more sizes of this brand. Thank you, Randy. Coming in second place with 2.2 out of 3 is the Itoshin 99. In third place with 2.1 out of 3 is the Watanabe tuning tip. In fourth place with 2 out of 3 is the Jahn tip. And coming in fifth place is unfortunately the Reyburn ProTip with 1.9 out of 3. Nate, I'm sorry, I love your tuning levers, you know that. I just don't love this tip. I think it's a little bit too big. However, I'm really excited to try the number 1, and I'll see you in Des Moines. Please don't hate me. And coming in last place with a disrespectful 1.7 out of 3 is the Tafijin. This is just not a good tuning tip. Please don't use it. As always, thanks so much for watching. Like and subscribe, share with your technician friends, all that good stuff, and let me know in the comments what you'd like me to review or talk about next. I'm off to Des Moines. I'll catch you nerds later.